Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 47 of my comic review video day calendar, and I say it's not Spawn year, but once again, we're getting closer to that than I'm intending. I'm not doing this on purpose. Except for yesterday, I kind of did that on purpose when I grabbed a Spider-Man comic that looked just like a Spawn comic with Todd McFarlane. But everything else that I've fished out of my boxes that I haven't looked at before, that I end up having a ton of comparisons to make with Spawn, not doing that on purpose. It just seems like there was something in the air, in the water, in the early to mid-90s with mainstream superhero comics. Everything is doing demons from hell, the occult, demons coming to people, trying to get them to take souls for hell. All of that is here. I'm not doing it on purpose. And you might be thinking, well, Cap, even though it was 10 years ago, you spent so much of your life looking at Spawn comics that maybe you just see it in everything. But when I show you this, you'll see it too. This is Hitman number 3, a series that you may or may not have ever heard of. This is not a thing that I hear talked about very often. Kind of like Resurrection Man, but unlike Resurrection Man, this had a pretty lengthy run. This had a whopping 60 issues, plus some crossovers and some other things, and there was a JLA Hitman miniseries that Ennis did after this, going back to this character, because apparently this was a big passion project for him, and he really loved working on this character and was kind of sad when it was over and thought that they had a lot more that they could do, but it got canceled at DC. So written and co-created by Garth Ennis with art by John McCrae. And I didn't remember seeing this character at all when I was a kid, at least the comics, but he would occasionally pop into big events, and I'm like, oh, who's this guy, this random mercenary with sunglasses? Not to be confused, of course, with Agent 47, with the PlayStation Hitman. I don't think those games are exclusive anymore, but they used to be, I do believe. But this, at first glance, kind of looks like DC's answer to the Punisher. After all, he is another gun-toting vigilante that only kills people he thinks deserve it, that he thinks are evil, and he justifies his killing because of that. But unlike Punisher, he doesn't have the same kind of tragic backstory, and he's not doing it to get revenge for anything. He's just really good at it and enjoys it. He's often got a big smile on his face, like he does in this cover here. Yeah, even with the blood trickling down his face. This is a guy who just really enjoys his work, and that's somewhat infectious. So a very different character from the Punisher, but still very violent, real gritty. It's, again, a gun-toting guy, and he's murdering people that arguably, or at least in his mind, is not murder because they need to be taken out, and why not make money from it? That's the big difference, of course, between him and Punisher, and it does read a little bit like a prototype sort of thing for Ennis before he'll get to the Punisher Max series, although he probably doesn't look at it that way because this was such a fun and special project for him. And they're also very different in that series, what I've read of it, is much more realistic than this and goes to much more disturbing places and really gets at the heart of the horrible side of humanity, the depth of atrocities that and just reprehensible behavior that human beings are capable of. This is scratching some of that, and I'm just basing this on the one issue I read and reading a little bit of background. I own quite a bit of this, but this is another series that I've never really looked at, and I will, and I keep saying this with stuff, I will probably take a look at more of this now. I found this quite enjoyable. This is more heightened than Punisher Max. It's more fun. It's got more of a kind of tongue-in-cheek quality to it. And I went ahead and picked this third issue instead of going all the way back to the beginning, just because I've been reviewing a lot of number ones, and I didn't want to make this the old number one show or anything. I like part of the point of this exercise this year has been take a look at a single issue and see how well it stands on its own, looking at single issues as separate entities as they were published, and looking at older stuff because, for the most part, because even into the mid-90s, this was a period where single-issue comics read a lot better by themselves than they tend to now. And so I wanted to at least occasionally look at stuff that wasn't even the beginning of an arc, much less the beginning of a series. So this is a story called A Rage in Arkham, and this is the third of 3 parts. I didn't read the first 2 issues. I was curious to see how good of an introduction to the book and the character this would be, considering that you'd have kids and teenagers that would go to a comic stand and see a series that was new, but that they missed the first few issues of, and they might still want to try it. And if this can hook them, then they'll keep reading it and maybe go back and try to get the first couple of issues. So there is reason to try to keep your story as readable as possible, and make it clear what the basic idea is and what the hook is supposed to be, even if you don't understand everything that's going on and you've missed the first couple of chapters. And this is another book that does a really good job of that. So I've only read the third part of this 3-part story, so basically just the climax, just the third act, but I was able to follow this just fine, and even found myself thinking, I mean, at some point I'll try to go back and read the first 2 issues, but I don't know how necessary that is, because this held together real well and gives you plenty of recapping without it feeling like recapping. It's not real forced in that. So the basic idea here is, and this is a real fun hook. In fact, before I get to that, let me just mention that the premise of this character is Tommy Monaghan was a kind of like the Punisher. He's an United States Army veteran. He was a Marine, or an ex-veteran. He's an ex-soldier. He's a veteran, and yet he became a mercenary in Gotham. And that's why Batman is in this book, because this is his home city, and eventually I assume he'll start going all around different parts of the DC universe. I know he mixes up with a lot of other superheroes and villains throughout this book. So this sort of like Resurrection Man feels like it could have been a Vertigo book. Again, in its grittiness, its violence, it being kind of a... It's a kind of an off-the-beaten path sort of book. It doesn't really read like a superhero book, but it's got a lot of superheroes in it, and it's curiously, considering its style and the kind of not very mainstream nature of it, is still very deeply rooted in DC mythology. And so you see Hitman mix it up with a lot of different heroes and see how they feel about his being a mercenary, and the fact that he is killing for funds, killing for money, but only killing bad people. So is it really that bad that he's around is kind of the question. And Garth Ennis really likes to deal with that in his Punisher. Is the Punisher maybe a necessary evil? And with this, it's not about necessary evil. Maybe later on it is, so much as it is, I mean, he is ridding the world of some bad people that need to be taken out. So even if he's not necessary, what's it really hurting? And of course, Batman has a much more specific morality than that. It's never, or a more absolute morality, I should say. It's never okay to kill, and so regardless of his reasons and the kind of people he's killing, Batman's not going to have that in his city. It's kind of the way he handles characters like the Huntress and like Azrael sometimes as well. So at some point before this, it's in the Bloodlines event. Tommy Monaghan gets bitten by a demon or an alien or something. I think it's a demonic thing. I forget. It's a monster of some kind, and he's got side effects from that give him superpowers. And the reason he wears sunglasses is because he has X-ray vision, which of course would be very helpful in his line of work. And if he uses that too much, it gives him headaches. And so he wears sunglasses for kind of the same reason that Cyclops wears a visor. He doesn't want to be using his powers all the time. And he also has some degree of telepathy, which also would be very helpful in his line of work. And he even mentions at the end of this that we actually, in this issue, don't get any sense of his X-ray vision. To be fair, that I had to read about on my own, doing a little bit of cursory research before I sat down for this review. So most of everything you need to know about this character is in this issue, but that is not. So the fact that he's telepathic, and you can kind of glean a little bit of his background, but it doesn't really get into all of that, because I'm sure we did that in the first issue, but you get his main power, which is telepathy, you get his attitude, and you get his worldview, his ideology. It's okay for me to kill and for money because I'm only taking out bad people. It's sort of like it's sort of like Dexter or something, where, yeah, what he does is bad, but how bad is it really? Because he's taking out people way more evil than him. And again, you get his attitude, you get the sense that he really enjoys what he does. So the premise of this story, and it's really fun to start here, I think, is somebody puts out $1 million hit on the Joker, who is in Arkham, and that's why this first story is set there. And so Hitman takes the bait and goes to try to kill the Joker in Arkham for money. And really bizarre, wild twist, last thing you would expect, it turns out that was all a ruse, and there was in fact no real hit on the Joker, and it's actually demons from hell trying to lure Hitman to them, lure Monaghan. Apparently, by the way, he is referred to as Hitman in the first issue, but then never again, except for in some other stories that he crosses over into. So the book is called Hitman because he's a hitman, but he is just referred to as Tommy Monaghan. It's sort of like Constantine in Hellblazer. And again, it feels very Vertigo in that way. And I guess you kind of have that with Resurrection Man. I don't know how much he's referred to actually as Resurrection Man. These are two characters I would have loved, by the way, to see to team up somewhere. And I also wish Ennis had done a Punisher Hitman crossover if DC and Marvel could have gotten along during that period to do the kinds of crossovers they were doing in the 90s, because they kind of quit doing that shortly after Amalgam. But that would have been really neat too. And I'll also go as far as to say that, like with Resurrection Man, I think this is a series that would be very cool to see adapted now with James Gunn's new DCU. I think this is really ripe for that. But anyway, it turns out that demons from hell are trying to get Tommy Monaghan to work for them. This is something they do apparently over history, where they find the most evil people they can that are really good at killing, that just kill a lot of people on their own accord, and they say, oh good, you're good at this and you're surviving, we're gonna make a deal with you, kind of a Malbolgia-like deal with the devil. Again, there's some Spawn here, but not to make him a Hellspawn, just to get him to work for them, and we want you to kill for us, to get us souls. And the mistake they've made is, and like, this is another one of those things that's kind of Spawn that's better than Spawn, because I've never fully understood why Malbolgia goes to Al Simmons over anybody else. Like, yeah, he's good at killing, but he clearly has a good soul, until much later, where that's kind of retconned by McFarlane because he realizes that it doesn't work, so he just makes it worse by making Al Simmons a horrible, detestable person, and then I don't want to read about him anymore. But with this, it makes sense that these demons from hell would go after Tommy, because at first glance, he seems like a sadist. He seems to really get off on what he's doing, but what they don't get is that he still has something of an honor code. And he's also just very full of himself and very independent and isn't interested in working for anybody else. So he talks about it almost like he's a mercenary entrepreneur or something. And he says, I only work for as a contract killer. I would assume that if one of these demons wanted him to kill someone specifically one time and they paid him money, he'd probably do it. And then maybe he would try to go after them because they're evil, but since they're supernatural and he can't really kill them and keep them dead, I don't know that he would do that. He does kill the main one that comes after him at the beginning of this, the one with a whole bunch of arms that kind of looks like General Grievous if he was a demon, or like a skull guy, who's apparently like the god of guns, which is a really interesting idea that once firearms are invented, we have a demon specifically for them. But anyway, Hitman kills this demon at the end of this, and we just see him go into a hole, like back down into hell, and he's like screaming all the way down. So it's real absurd. And the demons that he answers to, that he's talking to here on this page, apparently like put him together in the first place. And so at the end of this, they're kind of reconstructing him, and they say, this time around, we're gonna add some brains and make sure that you're smart enough to do this, and you're gonna go back after Monaghan, and we're gonna make him work for us. So I assume at some point in the series, this guy comes back and that happens. So again, Batman's not happy that he's trying to kill the Joker, and he and a female cop are actually trying to protect the Joker from Monaghan. But again, big plot twist, it turns out that there was no contract, and these demons are just trying to get Monaghan to work for them. So he says no. They have a big battle. There's a big firefight. You might be wondering about the swastika on the demon's head, the kind of god of guns, or the demon of guns, and that's kind of the sign in this for pure evil, which a lot of comics like to go to, especially in this period. And so the idea is, Monaghan is the latest in a long line of, again, characters in history that these demons have gone to hire. And the last ones that they mention are, and I assume that's why the swastika, were Nazis. And they graciously or were happy to take the job, and these guys are kind of associating Monaghan with them, but he is on a very different sort of playing field. So even though we can't condone what he does necessarily evil, he's kind of playing judge, jury, executioner. He's the only discrimination that he does is based on action, not who a person is, how they were born, what they look like. He's not a bigot. He's not an intolerant person, except he doesn't tolerate people hurting other people. And then he hurts them. That's where he's kind of like the Punisher, of course. And then by the end of this, he kind of breaks that down for Batman, where he says, I'm not your enemy. I'm taking out the kinds of people that you're throwing in Arkham. What is so bad about having me around? And Batman, just with his, again, absolute morality, very simply says, you're killing people. That's not okay. I can't have that. And so So then he says, I could just read your mind and tell everyone that you're Bruce Wayne, and or who you are. He doesn't read his mind, so he doesn't know. And Batman says, why don't you do that? And this is the most revealing moment, I think, of this character, and is the thing that most makes him feel like an interesting thing to keep reading. He says, well, you don't know me very well. He's not going to do that because Batman hasn't done anything wrong. Even if Batman is going after him and making his life difficult, he's not evil. He's not doing abhorrent behavior. And so he really isn't Hitman's enemy, and he's not going to treat him as such. But this is a really cool way to open your book, I think. Like, what a neat hook in your first issue, which of course I didn't read, but there's a hit out on the Joker, and this guy's going to go try to kill the Joker. Part of the main idea with this book, too, that I didn't get into is because of Hitman's abilities, he goes after the kinds of characters that most other mercenaries are not equipped to deal with or would be too afraid to deal with. And so he tries to take out like again, demons, monsters, aliens, and that makes this a real supernaturally driven kind of book. So it's kind of embracing, which is maybe a little bit ironic given what Ennis works on later on. It's kind of like if the Punisher were to more embrace its superhero roots, which in certain series it absolutely does, but a lot of people's favorite Punisher stories are a lot more down to earth and not really about the Marvel Universe. This is, again, very rooted in the DC Universe, and that's kind of the point of it. So it's taking a genre that I don't usually get real into, but blending it with one that I do. And so it's kind of fun to see this guy's perspective on a superhero universe at large. There's also some kind of silly stuff here, like we don't see very many Arkham inmates besides the Joker, and the Joker doesn't get very much to do here. He's kind of just there to remind us why Monaghan was here in the first place, and but you do get Killer Croc in a few panels, and he has a really weird look in this. I couldn't immediately tell that's who that was, and he's introduced in this really odd panel where he's laughing at Seinfeld. He just says, "I like Seinfeld." That's kind of amusing. This art style is pretty unique. It's not really my bag, but it's very consistent, and I think it certainly matches this material real well. It's a little like, I don't know if I want to say overly stylized, but like I'm just not a big fan of these kinds of character models personally. This kind of overly sketchy sort of look, but like I said, it's very appropriate for this, and I found it easy to adjust to it, even though I'm not a big fan of these kind of intentionally like ugly kinds of faces. It reminds me a little bit of the early Sam and Twitch issues that Bendis did. That's one of the main places Bendis got his start in the late 90s, early 2000s. But I also think it looks a lot like quite a bit of stuff coming out from Dark Horse around this time. But anyway, that is going to do it for me. I actually recommend this one. I think this is pretty fun and kind of a unique, original sort of premise. And I have a bunch of these, so at some point I will try to finally read them. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you again tomorrow with another one. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.